Junku Dumdunki, Boğaziçi Üniversitesi. Doğru? Yanlış? Tamam. Bu kadar yeter. Sunumuma başlıyorum.
Ses.
Okay. Don't be too impressed. Eşim Türk. Anlıyor. Tamam. What I'm going to talk to you about today, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail, to be perfectly honest. There's been some good presentations earlier on, giving you some exciting insight into marketing. I'll be honest, I think I've been doing marketing the same way for like 20 odd years. I think I've been doing analytics pretty much the same for 30 or so years. Of course, things are changing, and what I want to give you a little bit of insight into is what's at the cutting edge of what we're doing from a SaaS perspective with customer journeys. And again, being honest, I've been on a journey in terms of building journeys for, I would say, over 20 years. And that for me started when I was doing collections optimization in a bank, where it was really quite difficult to understand all the different interactions that were going on. And I'll let you in on one secret that I've learned. The journey actually, in itself, isn't hugely important. People sometimes are just analyzing and thinking that they've got to analyze all these different journeys, but in reality, you already have an awful lot of information about what people are trying to do. So if you're a bank and you're trying to sell credit cards, you probably already know that you've got customers that need credit cards. You need to facilitate that journey some way or other, but in reality, 2 or 3 steps are all that's going to be additionally predictive in terms of what's going to help you make decisions, rather than like the 20 or so things that they've done previously. And that's my core message, and we're going to go through just to kind of like delve into that and see how SaaS now approaches that challenge. So just to get the stage set, despite the fact everyone's talking about customer experience, of course customer experience is important, and we are still all trying to do these things, improve sales, profit, and so on, and we're trying to reduce costs. I think no matter what presentation I see now, it is all still about profit, however you define that, and which is revenue minus cost, ultimately. You can have complex calculations, but ultimately that's what we're trying to do. If you want to stick customer experience on there on the right, it's the same thing. We're trying to maximize one thing and minimize some other things. So what I've learned over the last few years is I don't really like all the new terminology for algorithms and different algorithms. I think sometimes data scientists try and confuse their internal consumers by using the greatest and latest words. So I have a taxonomy that I've kind of like built over the last couple of years, where I focus on kind of one-to-one analytics across a number of different areas, I would say, and more like portfolio decisions, which are across a separate set of areas. So within those one-to-one decisions, I would classify things like prediction being something you are trying to do. So prediction starts with gut feel, to be perfectly honest. It starts with like univariate analysis or just simple response rates. It leads on to things like decision trees and regression models and so on. And then it leads on to things such as random forests and gradient boosting. But essentially, you're trying to do the same thing with all that. You are trying to predict, will this customer do A or not do A? And if it's A or B, you might have 2 models to do that. Secondly, on the right-hand side, there are a bunch of other areas which I would say are kind of like more portfolio decisions, things like forecasting, for example, where really you've got to look at everything that's going on across your entire customer base to try and inform decisions. And sometimes these things come together a little bit, and attribution and customer journeys are starting to kind of like bridge that gap, but I still think you can go a long way just by using some of the existing techniques that you've probably got in your business already. So yes, don't feel you have to do all of these to be successful. I kind of like spent 20 years really just doing prediction, segmentation, arbitration and optimization, and kind of like testing, essentially. And I think you can do an awful lot with that. And even when it comes to things like recommendations, I know there are very good algorithms out there. SAS has great algorithms for recommendations. Even with recommendations, you could just use predictive models and then arbitrate across those predictive models. So if there's one message to take away from this slide, it's like try and kind of like focus your mind on what you're actually trying to achieve, not just from the business objective, and I completely agree with the previous speakers. You've got to focus on that business objective, but what's the kind of analytical technique that's going to help you deliver that? Don't just focus on that analytical technique in the first place, which is sometimes the wrong way to do things, I would suggest. So just to kind of like emphasize that point, what I want to do is like kind of like focus on what we're saying as regards what our ultimate objective is. And the reason I keep turning around is because the screen here in front of me is really tiny, but my notes, which is an empty page, because I don't have any notes, is kind of like quite big. So I'm going to keep turning around, so I apologize. So our ultimate objective here is that we are trying to get some kind of impact, whether it's improve the customer experience, whether it's make a sale, even if it's a micro goal, and that's quite important. Sometimes you've got micro goals to achieve on a customer journey. We're trying to get that. What we have, some data about a customer at the moment. We've got some historical data about that customer. That could be journey data. That could just be historical data as well. We can talk an awful lot about defining what customer journey data is, but essentially you've got an awful lot of historical data. Then you've got a load of different things that you could actually do. And these aren't necessarily just marketing actions, and these just aren't kind of like you to them. They can be them to you as well. But when they are you to them, then you need to kind of like almost work out what is the best thing to do. Either to achieve that next goal, which might be a micro goal, or to kind of like achieve something else. But ultimately you are just trying to improve the conversion of that next step, essentially. And that's not easily done. So this graph or this diagram looks kind of like relatively simple, but it's not that easy. And there's a couple of reasons it's not that easy. And this is the first reason, essentially. I see everywhere I go still huge silos where essentially we have the old world of database marketing, we have the new world of digital marketing, and they don't talk to one another. They don't talk to one another across the business, and they don't talk to one another across the data. And I see kind of like digital marketers still trying to do the things that database marketers had solved 20 years ago, essentially. So we still see digital marketers saying, oh, I want to target young people in this region with this kind of like income. And it's like, could build a predictive model for that. You know, that's how we used to do these things. But digital marketers are sometimes having to learn those things over again, perhaps rather than talk to the rest of their colleagues. Of course, it's different in startups where they're kind of like digitally savvy, and sometimes those people just bring the new models to life there. But equally, I do see these silos still existing. The way SAS have like brought this problem together is essentially to have like a hybrid marketing approach where we bring the data together, we bring the kind of like the software together that's controlling those things, and we're able to then at least connect the data across these journeys. Now, making a decision about what the next thing is another matter. But essentially, we need to be fast, flexible, secure, and compliant. And that last compliant one I know is really, really boring. Compliance, everyone knows compliance is boring. It's the best way to, and quickest way to get yourself kicked out of a marketing conference is to talk about compliance. But essentially, I've seen an awful lot of data science projects being developed, and then they realize that they've built the data on data that is not compliant. So they spent however many months working on something that can't ultimately be used. And so you've got to have that focus on what are you actually going to do with it? Can I deliver this as well? I get bored of just having interesting projects. I want to know, how am I actually going to use that now? How do I deliver upon that insight? Okay, there's a bunch of other things, and I won't go through each of these, that are making things kind of like more difficult. But I think, you know, I just call out things like maths is generally hard. That is what is confusing a lot of the customer journey. That's why a lot of people are just trying to simplify it and ignore the actual problem. There is so much hype about analytics at the moment. Anything with a plus sign in it at the moment seems to be AI, essentially. I find that quite frustrating. A lot of people talk about AI without giving you any kind of insight of what they mean by AI. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing now. I'm going to give you a bit of meaning for what I see as being kind of like AI. The way I think of it, yes, it's about these better algorithms and kind of like funky algorithms and the new algorithms. More importantly, I think automation of processes. I'm going to ignore robots and cyborgs and all that kind of stuff, because within the real world today, as regards trying to do marketing better, we're a long way away from having any of that. So when I talk about automation, I'm talking about automation of data processes, automation of some of the modeling processes, but more importantly, automation of the deployment processes. If you can get a model delivered and running in a few hours, that's way better than 3 months, for example. And as such, that's probably as important a thing to do as investigate a new algorithm, in my humble opinion. Additionally, there's a couple of other things like embeddable analytics. So people don't always want to have to do the analytics, they just want it delivered to them. That's kind of like a big piece now. And this last one on the right, in terms of the human-like interfaces, that's more things like chatbots. And of course, we're in marketing, loads of these chatbots are coming to life now and being used all over the place, which just simply requires a bit of text analytics. So if there's one core message about AI I would give you, is like, it's not a new discipline, it's not anything kind of like out of this world. I think it really is just a level of sophistication across those existing techniques that I was talking to you about. So I want to just dive in and give you a little bit of an example on that on prediction. And when it comes to prediction, like I say, gut feel or simple response rates were prediction. When bank managers used to make a decision when you were sat in the office, so probably none of you are old enough to remember this, but I remember being sat in the bank officer's office with my mum, asking for a loan, and he kind of like looked her in the eye and then looked at the account and then made a decision, essentially. We've moved on from there. We now have decision trees, regression models, all those kind of things in the background that are helping make those decisions. But gut feel was a prediction. And a lot of marketers are still trading on gut feel, to be perfectly frank. You can do new algorithms on prediction, like the random forest, like the gradient boosting. Sometimes they perform really, really well. Sometimes they only give you a little bit of an uplift. Do you really want to make the effort to be more and more sophisticated, to get a little bit of effort? Or potentially would you make a smaller effort to do more automation on your existing capabilities to get more benefit, essentially, to your business? And I think, I don't always know the answer to that, and I think it varies business to business, but I would say ask yourself that question. At least ask yourself that question before investigating the new algorithms, so you know what's ahead of you. Okay. And this was the approach we took to how we were going to start understanding customer journeys. So, first of all, we started using decision trees to try and understand whether we could make or understand what the customer journey looked like. And essentially then, I'll give you a bit more detail on this in a slide or two. Essentially, rather than having a decision tree where you're using customer data, simply build the decision tree on the customer history or the things you've done with a customer, and you'll naturally start to get the important events. So if they did click on this, or if they did visit your store, if they did ring in, that's the information that then goes into your decision tree, and you'll naturally start to get some journeys appearing through the decision tree. Secondly, regression. Again, using the same analogy, rather than building your predictive model on customer data, build your model on customer history data, and you will start to understand what things are having an impact on your outcome. So I did this in a kind of like a telco, where we took all the different campaigns that were being run. We looked at the revenue that was occurring as a result, or the difference in revenue from month 1 to month 2, and we said which of these campaigns are having the impact. And that was a regression model. Now I know it sounds simple, but that was something we were doing a few years ago, and that was leading to us to try and understand what are the touch points that are impacting upon the goal, which is revenue or whatever. And this final point is probably one of the most important points. When you think about it that way, what actually then is important when it comes to customer journey optimization and understanding customer journeys is it's the combination of events that are additionally predictive. That's what you're looking for when you're analyzing these customer journeys. When the customer does A then B rather than B then A, do I get a different impact on my kind of like ultimate conversion rate? And if I do, that's good information. But A and B, if it doesn't matter what order those two are in, you could just build a normal predictive model, and A and B are both steps on a journey, but they don't have to be connected, and it doesn't matter whether they're connected or not. And that's the fundamental thing that we started to kind of like investigate. And you can do this, as I say, with predictive models as well. And the point I just want to make here, which is just emphasizing the points the last couple of minutes, are on the left I've got like a traditional model. In the middle I've got building exactly the same, using exactly the same technique but different data, your campaign data or your touch point data, to understand what's predictive. And on the right I've simply got kind of like combinations. And if the combinations aren't predictive, then they're not important. And those combinations are essentially journeys. So that's why I'm saying campaign 1, then 2, or 2, then 1. Okay. So I think it's fair to say that our journey to customer journey optimization started kind of like with trying to analytically derive the important journeys as I was describing. And we've just done that for digital traffic source attribution. And I hope you all understand what digital traffic source attribution means. I'll explain it in a couple of slides, if not. But then we've also kind of like moved on to attribute conversion contribution for each data source. And ultimately, our next step is to optimize that next step and extend the theory to all touch points. And as a software vendor, like kind of we're providing very much out-of-the-box capability for that first step, and we're being much more customized in terms of that final step. But ultimately, as we get better at this, we'll be able to bring more out-of-the-box solutions, I think, to that more kind of like complex optimization problem. So this is what I mean by digital touchpoint attribution. There's a number of different events that could actually occur, and then you've got an outcome at the end. And we're trying to work out which of those, and which combination of those, and which paths were important in driving that conversion. Now, the way we do this now is we capture the data automatically. So we have tooling whereby we are capturing everything that a customer is doing on your web traffic. So anything that kind of like you've got web-enabled devices, so your mobile phone, kind of like app, your web browsers and so on, and any other way they access the web, we're able to capture all that information, and importantly, we're able to link all of those devices together. So we do the identity management for you as well. We then, in the background, run our models. We then present the results to the user, and if you are kind of like a data geek and you want to kind of understand it more and do your own modeling, then you can have the data if you wish to have so, which is valuable for many reasons. Okay, so let me just give you a feel for what that then looks like. Now, you've probably seen a few people present customer journeys and maybe Sankey diagrams, and they're really kind of like big and complex. And to me, they look a little bit like spaghetti. So what we've done is we've kind of like filtered out all of the noise, essentially. So this is a screenshot, and if you want to see more, I'm around for the rest of the day. But essentially what we do is we consider both the converting and the non-converting customers. So a traditional attribution model might say, for example, I had 100 converters, they came from this path. If there were like 1 billion other people that came from that path, is that really an important thing? Or is it more important that they had 100 converters from a different path, but only 100 people went through that path? You know, one's got 100% conversion, one's got a 0.0 several times 1% conversion. So we do that, so we cut out the noise that you sometimes see within journeys. Secondly, we make sure that we understand whether the order is important. So in this diagram here, I've got paid, then organic, and then I've got organic paid. And those two different journeys lead to different conversion rates. So this is the AB has a different result to BA. That's an important thing to pick up on. And thirdly, we're able to pick up on the timing between events. So if, for example, you see something where conversion rate drops after a certain time, then you know that that's the point at which you can interject and do something different. Okay. So that's understanding the paths. Then we've got to add up all those paths to work out who we should, or which channels and which touch points we should give the conversion share and conversion credit to. Now, there's a lot of traditional ways that this is done at the moment, and those I would describe as rules-based models. So you've probably heard of first click attribution. You may have heard of last click attribution. Essentially what that's saying is if a person converted, then I'm going to say it was all down to the first thing that they did on that customer journey. Last click, you can guess that for yourselves. We've got the kind of like analytical version of that, so as I just described, and it starts to bring up some interesting things. So this is an example, and I've kind of like made this graph look a little simpler. I've just taken two different models. One is First Touch, and the other is our analytical model. Now in First Touch, what you can see is that paid search on the right is getting a huge amount of conversion credit using that rules-based approach. But in reality, Many more customers are really converting when they come to us directly, which is that big blue graph. And this, I think, doesn't solve the entire problem. I think it raises interesting questions and it pushes people in the right direction. This to me looks like as if it could be a business which has actually maybe started up online and is still spending a lot of money on paid search, but in reality, it's got a lot of people coming directly to its website and it's built its brand. So actually maybe it just needs to concentrate on building its brand rather than paying for more search advertising. Okay. So our next challenge is to use all that information, use that journey we've been on to work out how we optimize this next step. And coming back to this graph, so the way to think about this is essentially data are states. And for state, think it's like a variable that's kind of like staying there and is going to be an input. And that's an input into an RNN, a recurrent neural network, which we find works well for this. And what we're putting into that as well are our marketing actions. So just as I was saying before, we've got all of our inputs. These are our states. We've got our potential actions, and we're using a recurrent neural network to now say, what is the next thing we should do? Now, the nice thing about this is we're actually using the journey data as an input into those states. So actually, journeys kind of like are forever evolving. And some people before have said that they're unpredictable and so on, but this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, essentially, whilst that journey is evolving, it might, we've got loads of different examples, loads of different states that a customer might be on. They might be on an early state, a middle state, a late state, whatever. It doesn't really matter. The state is kind of like where they are at the moment. Therefore, we then kind of like stick that through the neural network. We try out different things. We use kind of like a greedy approach, or sorry, I should say we're kind of like balancing kind of like exploration with like kind of exploitation in terms of this process to work out the next thing for a customer to do. And then we get the impact. And again, the good thing here is the impact can come back, and that can actually be a state because it could have been a micro goal that then becomes a state for your next step on the journey. Equally, the information can go back in and be part of your kind of outcome data or your journey data again. And this is a way of essentially, in one step, optimizing that next step of the customer journey. And again, the thing I would emphasize as well is those states, they can just simply be customer insight that you've got. They could be your existing predictive models, for example, that are helping that recurrent neural network work out what a customer is trying to do. Okay, I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about how our technology is built now. We've kind of like found that there are these kind of like different profiles within the organization, and software needs to support all of these different profiles. So getting consistent data across them, first of all, is really quite tough. But what we're finding is that the marketers and digital marketers, and please don't anyone be offended if I'm kind of like segmenting you more than I should do. Everyone in marketing talks about personalized marketing, and then they say, this is what consumers want, like as if there's just one consumer. So I feel bad about just having 4 here. It could be a bit more personalized. But essentially what we're doing is we're providing out-of-the-box analytics, automated analytics, ease of testing and learning for those digital marketers. But then for the data scientists, we're kind of like making our tool where open to open source. We're kind of like creating automatic ABTs so that people can get hold of the data easily in an analytical ready format. If you've ever tried to get clickstream data from one of the big providers out there, you'll know how difficult it is to turn that into an ABT. If somebody comes along and does that ABT for you, that's quite valuable. We always hear the story about, building models is 80% about the data and 20% about doing the modeling. Well, if somebody does that 80% for you, then you're onto a winner. Okay. And then within that SaaS platform, we've got a number of different ways of kind of like a number of different capabilities, I should say. And I don't want to go on to that in too much detail, but I did recognize that we've got some interesting kind of like correlations in terms of terminology here, like discover and engage. So I think need a bit of branding work going on there. Anyway, I want to give you some use cases from the SaaS Analytics experience in 2019 in Milan. This is a SaaS conference where we focus on analytics. I guess the name's in the title. But we had a few interesting presentations, and this is my favorite presentation from the conference. Apologies to the Turkish Airlines people who are sponsors here, but this is Pegasus. And apologies to Louis as well, who kind of like, when he comes back from holiday, he gets sad because he's being marketed to as well. Actually, my wife, when we're on holiday, she's booking the next holiday. So actually, there's always that constant excitement about going away. But this was a fantastic customer journey that Pegasus essentially have. And it just resonated so well with me because we're trying to talk about customer journeys. This is a true customer journey, and they're like tracking people or wanting to track people. I need to be careful how I say that. From the point of them thinking about the journey they're going to be going on to, from the time they kind of like pack their bags, to getting in the taxi, to getting to the airport, to getting on the plane, to arriving, to getting to the destination, to having the holiday, to coming back to the airport, back home, thinking about the next holiday. And I think that's a really nice way of thinking about that customer journey. Second one I wanted to talk about was Stolotto. S8 Capital is Stolotto. This is the Russian lottery. And these are a couple of screenshots. If there's any Russian speakers, they can translate for me, but I doubt it. And the translators have probably already got a hard enough time with how quickly I'm talking. But we're kind of like personalizing these spots on the website. So when somebody kind of like purchases something, then that spot on the website, that real estate on the website is something that we will personalize to the customer. And what they're able to do is give those personalized messages and make them more relevant to customers and upsell better, to be perfectly honest. This is another example of where they're doing that, a couple of additional personalized spots. But this is the killer slide, essentially. Like their ROI is like 5,000%. You don't often see that kind of return on investment these days within the marketing world. It becomes tougher and tougher, I think it's fair to say. The 186 or 5, the 185 rubles is essentially doubling the size of the basket for those people that they are personalizing. And they run a head-to-head test of like people that they don't do any personalization, those that they do personalization to. So that's a pretty solid result. There's a couple of additional references that I've got as we go through here, just to give you a feel for some of the people that we help. So Epipoli Group is a loyalty scheme in Italy. We do a lot of work with them, and they kind of like mainly use us for the data challenge. We've heard about data a few times today. These slides, by the way, are kind of like available for you to kind of like have afterwards, and so don't feel you have to read all of them that quick. We've heard about Net Promoter Score also, so Nationwide is a building society in the UK, and they use us to do the text analytics and improve the kind of like a customer experience in the call center. And for a few years, we've been doing real-time personalization at Shop Direct. Shop Direct is the biggest home shopping channel, essentially. Not, well, home shopping, like in terms of like kind of you buy from sat in your home in the UK as well. And they use like real-time decisioning to kind of like capture the information in real time and present things far more relevant to customers during that experience. So to wrap up, like in summary, SAS believe that AI has the power to kind of like transform the world. I've given you a bit of a definition of AI, but it is about those algorithms, the automation of those algorithms, as well as the kind of like the interfaces as regards how those work. Our approach is we're trying to embed the analytics into the software as much as possible so that we can solve the problem for the business marketer, and at the same time we can like enable the data scientists to do more. And customer intelligence is a raft of packages that you have from SAS that kind of like enable that, enable you to do much better customer marketing. If any of the things I've said to you today were interesting, come along and chat to me afterwards. I'm around for the rest of the day. But so much, thank you very much for your time today.